Okay, I'm Meredith Blackwell, and we're at the Mycological Society of America meeting in Minneapolis, and we are in the year 2019, and this is Don Pfister and
Bob Blanchette.
And we are here to interview Bob, who's had a very nice career doing all sorts of exciting things with fungi that interest everyone, the general public as well as mycologists themselves. And just as a prefix to all this, I just want to mention that my last lecture in an introductory, well, it was probably a humanistic mycology, was about a day in life of a mycologist, and I picked Bob. So there were some very interesting things he's done. Don, do you want to ask about what these interesting things are?
Well, let's see. With Bob, I know that Bob grew up just around the corner from where I live,
I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yep, and collected fungi there as I was young. And I guess if you're interested in how I got started in things,
yeah.
I actually was on a science fair. This was in middle school, and I had a project in looking at fertility of plants. And so I took plants and I took some different types of substrates and soils and fertilizers, and these plants grew at different heights and things, and it was an exciting, interesting experiment. And then the experiment ended, and I wanted to do something more. And so what I decided to do was to take these plants and cut them up and put them into jars to see how long it will take to decay these plants. And I had them, all the different treatments, and so I put them in these jars. And they were there for a long, long time with nothing happening because there wasn't, of course, any moisture. And I wanted to see, will some degrade faster than others?
So how old were you?
This was in middle school, so I guess I was in seventh
13.
grade.
Some fascination from the beginning.
Yeah, and then it all continued from there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So one of the things I really was interested in that you did was the tobacco made out of polypores.
Yeah,
in Alaska?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is by the indigenous people in Alaska, call it ikmik.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a Phelinus igniarius that is burned into an ash, and the ash is mixed with tobacco.
Oh, okay.
And this actually dates back to the 17, 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And before tobacco was brought up to Alaska and along the Pacific Northwest coast there by sea captains and things, they actually would use the same fungus and burn it and mix it with willow bark, and would be chewing this. And so why they do this is that it causes, you have a very high pH in this ash of this fungus. And when you burn igniarius, it's a very, very fine ash.
Okay.
And so they take it and they mix it into tobacco, and then they will use it as chewing tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
And the increase in the pH with the tobacco causes a very fast nicotine rush into the bloodstream. And so you would get like a very strong reaction to the nicotine. And it was just surprising to find that there were communities where they were still using this in Alaska.
I sent your paper to a woman I know who's a physician in Alaska. She goes up to Port Barrow and a lot of other places she's flown in, and so she's going to look for more use of it.
Yeah. There's a lot, and it actually has some negative aspects because in these communities, a lot of people use it in a traditional way, and a lot of women will be chewing this, and even pregnant women. And often, when you have this high amount of nicotine going into somebody's bloodstream, they get addicted to it, of course. And even pregnant women will have children that will be addicted when they're born to this nicotine. So there's a program on trying to educate a lot of the indigenous people about the hazards of this.
Yeah, I think your paper has a poster in it about
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also worked on other things, from that area. I guess they were mostly the indigenous people had a creation legend
They did.
that involved
This-
fungi.
With the fungus man,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and this is a Haida myth for the origin of women. and
And are you going to admit what the origin of women is?
well, you know, they were losing their culture, and Edenshaw was a carver, and he decided to carve an image of the origin of women in an argillite plate, and it's now in the Field Museum in Chicago. But the myth has
The raven.
the raven is in the front of the canoe, and he's trying to get to a part of the ocean that has various women parts growing in it, and he needed to collect these and put them together to create women.
Right.
And so he tried all of the crest figures. He tried the bear, and he tried the raven. Oh, excuse me, the raven's in the front of the canoe. He tried the raccoon and many things, and nothing that was earthly could breach this supernatural barrier. And then he took a fungus and put it into the back of the canoe, and it turned into, you know, a person. And since the fungus was actually unearthly and had supernatural powers, it was able to breach this barrier, and he was able to get to this site, capture these women parts, and bring it back.
And make a total woman.
And it's interesting, you know, the origin of women has the fungus man involved with it. The origin of man is just raven went over to a clamshell, a cockle shell, and pecked at it, and out popped man. So it's quite simple. But this is a much better creation story.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in terms of MSA, that was a
It was a nice logo for the meeting.
it was a
It
logo,
was for
and
one
it
of the
was on
international
various
meetings.
things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was another polypore from that area that was used as a grave guardian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Laricifomes officinalis, or agaricon.
And
Yeah.
is that how you got involved in all this? As I
You
remember,
know, that was one of the first ones.
Yeah.
That,
They were trying to identify the
Yeah.
substance it was made
It-
from.
And actually, I was working on decay projects in the American Museum of Natural History when I was looking at soft rots in some of these cedar totem poles and things. And they had an object, and it was a carved object. And I looked at it, and they had thought it was wood, but it wasn't. It was actually, you know, the fruiting body of the fungus.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to the curators that this is really interesting. And she said, oh, we have more. And, you know, and she went off, and we were doing our work, and later in the afternoon, she came back pushing this cart, and the cart had a whole bunch of these on there, all from shaman graves, where the shaman would take these and use them in rituals. And, you know, at the time I said, here's a fungus that has medicinal properties. And this is back in the, you know, mid-1800s. And we have the shaman knowing that that has these properties and using them, but then taking it a step further and, you know, using it in rituals to try to convince people that they're actually going to get better.
You,
Yeah.
you have that wonderful polypore that looks like a hand.
Yes.
And
You know the
well, no, it's at the Peabody Museum
it
at
is.
Harvard, and somebody was visiting and said, couldn't we see if we could go over and see that? So I set this up, and
Oh,
we
great.
went over, and we were able to see it, and you know, it was used somehow,
Yes.
part of it like a necklace.
And this
The
is in another part
Ganoderma.
of the world.
Yeah, it's in where, New Guinea?
New
or,
Guinea,
yeah,
yes. Yep. Collected about 100 years ago
Yeah,
by,
And-
by Putnam, was
Yeah.
the anthropologist.
right, famous guy
Yeah.
for doing that. The sequel is that you found this illustration
Yeah.
of the Ganoderma in something in the 1830s, I think.
Yes.
And the odd thing about this all is that we were doing something This was after the visit, after I'd seen the thing in life. And I was looking through an old book, and there's this polypore, this Ganoderma, that has these finger-like projections. And I thought, I wonder if Bob knows about that. And then we turn up that he'd already published a little article about
So you had found it as well.
Yeah, it was almost
Yeah.
simultaneous, I
This
think.
was 100 years earlier. It's like it was called The Hand of the Evil Demon. And it's a beautiful one.
It's a big plate.
It's a very big plate, and it has a Ganoderma fruiting body, which is a typical shelf-like, but then it also has this secondary growth where you had the finger-like projections that extended out, my gosh, 13, 14 inches
long.
out from it.
Yeah, I've seen it in your office, right? Did you have
No.
it in your office? Okay,
don't
maybe
think so.
it was, you took me over to see it, maybe. Did you?
We didn't do it.
I've seen it somewhere. Maybe it was a picture.
Picture.
But this is another good example where, these shaman are using fungi that have medicinal
Yeah.
properties with these Ganodermas,
Yeah.
and they're using it in a similar type of way, where they're using it in rituals and things.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, what about the one that's Anna's sent it?
This is a
That was
different
at the
fungus.
Field Museum, wasn't it, the photograph?
Actually, this is in the Canadian history
Okay.
of Canadian Museum of History,
Okay.
and as well as in some other ones there.
I thought there was a photograph in the Field Museum of the people wearing them on their robes.
Actually,
That was
the
from-
Provincial Museum of
okay,
Alberta
okay.
has actually photographs of these,
Uh-huh.
and this is the sacred fungus of the Plains Indians.
Mhm.
And
And
they
they
would
would
use these,
put them on there, sew them on?
right? They would make necklaces out
Mm-hmm.
of them, and also put them onto their
This-
ceremonial blankets.
Mhm.
And it has a very magnificent aroma. And so a lot of Native Americans are using aromatic plants, of course, like sage and sweetgrass and things.
Mhm.
And this one has a very strong smell of anise. And if you were walking in some of these old growth willow stands where this is found, and if there's one nearby, you can actually smell it, 10, 20 feet away. It has such a strong aroma.
Yeah.
And something I found recently is that this occurs in Scandinavia, and the Sami people had used it. And
They
Carl
use it too.
Linnaeus reported going up there on an expedition
Mhm.
and finding that they were using this as well, but they used it a little bit differently. And the men would wear it around their necks to attract women. So
A
Interesting.
pheromone.
a pheromone, yes. Yeah.
So we neglected to say that really what you do is study decay, right?
Yes.
Fungi and fungi that cause decay.
Yeah, and from that, I have found these different examples in different natural history museums.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a lot of objects left in these museums that no one's looked at. So many things get collected and put into storage cabinets, and then there they remain without any work done on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of fungi that need to be identified in these museums. And the one that is in the Peabody Museum, Putnam, who was the anthropologist, he collected many things, brought them back, apparently was going to be doing something with them, but got interested in Africa.
Yeah, he went off to Africa and
he
established.
stayed, I think,
Yeah,
for-
no, he did, and there's a kind of odd mycological connection with him. He married David Linder's sister. David Linder was curator at the Farlow, the nephew of William G. Farlow.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so
and
she
there's
was
some papers of
Interesting.
his in the auction, I noticed,
of whose?
of Linder's.
Of Linder's, yeah.
Oh.
But I discovered this fairly recently, but Mary, I think her name was Mary, lived with him in Africa for a period. She died on a trip on the way back from Africa.
Can you
But-
imagine him being in this area? And at that time, this was like one of the last frontiers,
Yeah.
studying sort of the ancient culture there, and seeing a shaman, and that also they were calling him a witch doctor at those times, wearing one of these things. And it's such a magnificent object. And these projections off of the Ganoderma look like fingers. They look like
Well, they
human
have
fingers.
fingernails.
And they look like, the pores look like fingernails.
Yeah.
Can you induce them to do that?
You know, I've been trying,
Okay.
and I have a grow room,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been producing Ganodermas, and then, so why you get this happening, you know, Ganoderma will produce sort of a long antler-like structure, the Ganoderma lucidum
Right.
complex. And it's producing this to get up out of the ground and produce it, you know, up in the air. And so high CO2 apparently stimulates that antler or finger-like projection to
So with global warming, we'll have more Ganodermas like this?
maybe, I don't know. But, so I grow these, I get the regular fruiting body, and then I close them into an enclosed container, and sometimes I put in ferns and leaves and things, and then I leave it in there, and you start getting new initials coming. But I have not been able to get one like this one in the Peabody, which is all in one plane. So you have the fruiting body, you know, is like
Yeah.
it was like this on the tree, and then it fell over, and then the new initials came up all in one plane. There's like 11 of them or something there. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's incredible.
2 glass panes.
So I have some, and they're going off in all directions.
But could you get
But-
glass panes and
Yeah, I think so.
squeeze them, and
But
that way you could
there's
watch them?
something spontaneous about this too, because you have that earlier illustration.
Yes.
And
And
so-
every, 100 years earlier, there's an example.
But they may have learned how to press them.
But different parts of the world,
Just-
I
it-
think, with this,
Yeah.
This-
isn't it?
the-
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This
Anyway.
other one was Indonesia as well.
Oh, was
So-
it Indonesia? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that these, fall over into that mass of leaves and things, and then it's trying to grow up
Yeah.
out of it.
Well-
Interesting. So that makes me ask a question about Ganodermas. Do they root underground? I've seen after hurricanes when trees have been blown over, there are Ganoderma fruiting bodies there within 3 days.
Well, the fungus is certainly growing, in that wood and has that biomass present. But it would come out, it would have to come up out of the ground. It's not
Yeah.
going to be
So they never would in the
subterranean.
dark. They need
No,
light.
they need light.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they must have
And
either.
actually, these finger-like projections will follow light. And I think
Oh.
that's one of my problems when I try to grow these,
Mhm.
is that it's going light in different directions. And you got to control that. But yet in nature, this has happened. And you have this beautiful example, and I tell people this is one of the wonders of the fungal world.
Yeah, it
because
is.
It's so extraordinary.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
But back to wood rot, you did work in Antarctica
Yes.
on
Uh-huh.
imported wood.
We have been looking at lots of wood decay projects on historic woods. And one real interesting place was Antarctica, where Scott and Shackleton brought wood down to Antarctica, to the Ross Sea region, as they were trying to get to the South Pole. And they made these huts. So they would build a hut in the UK, number it all, take it down, go down to Antarctica, build it again, and then they would spend years there as they laid food depots to the South Pole for the final run to get there. And so there's several of these huts in the Ross Sea that we've worked on. And the conservators there have found that there's decay taking place, and we thought, well, this is going to be something from Europe. This is going to be from the UK or New Zealand, because they'd always stop off at New Zealand. And this is going to be typical brown rots, and the typical fungi. And we go down there, and we find that that's not the case at all, that they're all soft rot fungi. And many of these, when we started to isolate in soils and on other substrates around, appear to be native to Antarctica. And that they are sort of polar fungi that are adapted there. And the explorers brought in a carbon source, and they
Off they
they
go.
exploited
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
Yeah.
and they grew in it.
Do they grow in refrigerators?
They could. These actually have high salt
Oh, okay.
tolerance,
So,
and they tolerate copper and other types of things too. And so they seem to have sort of non-specific ways of survival in extreme environments. Not only freeze thawing, but also high salts, high metal ions, and things like that they can tolerate. And a group of these is Cadophora, and we found many species there in Antarctica, but also in the Arctic. And we're doing some similar type work in the Arctic with Parks Canada on some wooden structures there. One of these is the Peary huts, which is located in the Ellesmere Island, northern Ellesmere Island.
Do you find the same species or?
There's actually some similar species, but some other ones as well. And it almost, in these areas, they seem to be lots of them. When we start isolating from soils and things, we can find 40 to 50% of the fungi are this Cadophora.
So some of them seem
Which
to
is-
have differentiated in the different
Yes.
poles.
These
Yeah.
these are these the Cadophoras that are anamorphs of Melicias and those things?
And we haven't, that connection
The
hasn't been made
cup
well
fungi.
yet.
Yeah,
But this
no.
would be the sexual state.
Yeah, no, that's what
Um,
I'm remembering for that
for-
group. Yeah, it's a very diverse and difficult group of fungi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then there was another story you told that I thought was really neat, and it was about making incense.
Oh, my.
Polypores are good
Yeah.
for all kinds of things. Who would have
Mhm.
guessed?
Yes. There are, the Haploporus, the one that the
Odoratus.
Odoratus,
Yeah.
the one that the Plains Indian used. This is a way that they would not only wear it around their necks, but they also would burn it as a smudge. But I have been working on some other projects in Asia.
That's the one.
And this is on a tree resin. And there's a tropical tree called Acrylaria that grows in Asia. And over thousands of years, this has been exploited because it has a very magnificent resin that when you burn it, you have this beautiful earthy aroma that is very sought after and has been for long, long periods of time. And so people never know which trees have this. And they would indiscriminately just cut down all these trees. And it got to a point after doing this for thousands of years that there's very few old growth Acrylaria left. And I was working in the Smithsonian on another decay project, and there was a person there that had just come from Indonesia and had some samples of this and was wondering, how do you get this resin to be produced? And I thought it was a real interesting question, and also these trees are endangered, and we wanted to see how could we possibly induce this. And so we actually had a 10-year project, 2 5-year EU projects to find mother trees that are still there, get seeds growing, and plant these out, and then do some experiments to see how do you induce that resin. And in nature, it appears that there is some natural things. You have wood borers that come into these trees, and as they get to be sort of old growth, as they're 80 to 100 years old, decay fungi get in, and the trees' non-specific host responses produce resin. And this resin in these trees has really a nice aroma to it when you burn it. And it's used throughout the area there as an incense, and also you can extract it out and use it as a oil, essential oil. In the Middle East also uses it. So it's used by Buddhists, it's used by Muslims, Hindu will use this. And the resin is formed as a host response to fungal invasion. And so we said, well, why can't we grow these in plantations and then inoculate them, wound them, and treat them with these different fungi? And we had to check different fungi and see what to use. And so we did this, and it actually works quite well. And the resin produced, so the trees, it takes 5 to 8 years to get a tree that's about this size. And then you can treat it, and in 2 years you can actually harvest the resin.
Wow. So
And
you're
then and it has a very, very high value, so it's helping lots of communities there in rural areas to have a new economy producing
Yeah,
this.
and a good conservation measure.
There's
Yeah.
no need to cut the old growth trees
Yeah.
anymore.
And it smells the same, old growth or artificially.
It is the same,
It's
and
all
we
the
actually
same.
had done some chemical analysis to show that it is similar. A lot of people would like to make this synthetically, but there's all sorts of terpenes present and other compounds there that give it this aroma. There are hundreds of different compounds, and so it's not possible to just synthesize it and to
Yeah.
produce it.
Yeah, it's
So the tree can do it,
yeah,
but we haven't been able to figure it out how to do it.
too complex.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one more short story about the King Midas.
King Midas was a project I worked on long ago, and it's one of the first ones I did on historic structures. And we do our work, and we do a lot of basic work on wood decay mechanisms and how these fungi are attacking wood and things. And there's a lot of disciplines that can use that. And one, when I was giving a talk, there was a person there that was a conservator, Elizabeth Simpson. And she was working on a project on the King Midas tomb. And the King Midas tomb, which is in the Anatolia Plain in Turkey, was a wooden, sort of like a log cabin that was, the king was placed in it, and it was closed over, and then a mountain of sand was put over it. And when it was excavated, they found the king in this wooden coffin, and they also found all of this wooden furniture from 700 BC. And Elizabeth was interested in saving this furniture and working with it, but it was decayed. And so she wanted to know how, what was decaying it, what was the structure of this decayed wood like, and then what types of consolidants could be used so that she could put strength back into it so that they could preserve it for display in museums and things.
Yeah.
And so I worked with Elizabeth for several years on that project, and looking at these fungi that occur in desert regions. And this particular one was also soft rot fungi that occur in these very dry environments, dry, high alkaline environments.
In Chaco Canyon, are they
Chaco
similar?
Canyon is quite similar, yes.
Similar fungi.
In Chaco Canyon, you can also have a lot of salt damage as well, where you have salt coming into the wood, being absorbed into the wood through desert sand and things, but not really raining hard enough to diffuse out and leach out the salts, and so the salts continue to build up in the wood. And the high amounts of salt actually cause a defibration of the wood and a separation and an attack on the lignin actually of the wood in these desert regions. But they also have soft rots that they like that high pH. And it's all these other fungi that normally are in temperate areas are excluded, and you have these others that can live in these extremes take over, and they're slow to act, but over time they can actually cause quite a bit of decay.
We were talking to Tom Harrington yesterday, and he was talking about the problem with finding a job as a forest pathologist. And you've actually considered yourself as a forest pathologist or not? Yeah.
Yep. In addition to all these little side projects, I do work on tree diseases.
Yeah, I thought that was important to mention.
And
the others are catchy,
and
though.
Fungi and forests. Yep.
And one of your students has done exceptionally well as a forest pathologist, Michael Wingfield.
A lot of them have. Dave Rizzo,
Yeah, Dave.
Mike Wingfield.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep, many of them. Mike has, I was at a meeting just the other day. We started to work on a new project, which is on grapevine trunk diseases. And Minnesota is growing grapes for wine production, and the increase in the planting of grapes has caused all sorts of diseases to come in. And so we're looking at these grapevine diseases, lots of canker causing diseases and things. And I was at this meeting, and there was a person there. She turned out to be my great granddaughter,
Mycological, yeah.
because it was from Mike to Pedro, and she was Pedro's student.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Pedro
Interesting.
Krause, yeah.
So with a career that spanned these different areas and so forth, advice for students?
Advice for students is to, let's see, what would be some good advice?
Don't do it unless you love it.
Yes, no, definitely love your work, have fun doing it, and do good work and do lots of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're enjoying it, you will do good work and it will all be good.
And you'll spend long hours on it.
Yeah.
Sure, and it won't seem that way.
No.
Yeah.
It's an
know.
addiction. Mycology is an addiction.
But it's a fun one.
Yeah.
That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
So
Thank you.
You're
we
welcome.
appreciate it.
Nice
We've
talking with
enjoyed
you.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.